I wasted years losing at chess until I learned this, a sleepy confession. You know, sometimes the quietest lessons take the longest to hear. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would sit alone late at night with a cup of lukewarm tea hunched over a wooden chessboard. The ticking of the old kitchen clock was the only sound, aside from the gentle clink of pieces being moved and removed, and I always lost. Game after game, year after year, I would try to study, try to mimic grandmasters, try to guess what made people so clever, but still, I'd fall, quietly, consistently. I wasted so many years chasing wins that never came, always looking for some magic trick, some shortcut, some dazzling move that would save me. But all it gave me was frustration and late nights full of sighs. And then something changed, not in the game, but in me. It wasn't a new opening. It wasn't a secret book. It was just one quiet shift in how I thought, and that changed everything. But let me tell you the whole story, softly, slowly, like pieces sliding across velvet, until sleep finds you gently. Shall we begin? I used to think I was smart. Really did. I'd sit there confidently across the table, fingers gently tapping the clock, eyes darting from knight to bishop, and I believed, truly believed, I had everything under control. But despite my efforts, despite my long hours staring at boards late into the night, despite the dozens of books I skimmed half-heartedly, I kept losing. Not just occasionally, consistently, painfully, embarrassingly, game after game, week after week, year after exhausting year. And what's worse, I blamed everything but myself. At first, I blamed my opponents. They're lucky, I told myself. They don't really know what they're doing. They just blunder into wins. Then I blamed the openings. The system is outdated, I muttered. Maybe I should switch from the Sicilian to the French. Then I blamed the clock, the lighting, my job, my mood, my lunch. Anything. Everything. Just not me. But deep down, painfully lodged beneath layers of stubborn pride, I knew the truth. I didn't understand chess. Not truly, not deeply, not like the winners did. I was playing moves. They were playing ideas. Let me take you back. I was 19, and I had just entered my third local tournament of the year. I'd lost the first two miserably, but I came in this time with renewed optimism, bolstered by a new course I found online. It promised rapid improvement in just 30 days. I'd practiced every tactic puzzle it offered, and I even memorized 10 new opening lines. I felt sharp, prepared, dangerous even. My first opponent was a wiry, gray-haired man named Roger, soft-spoken, polite, and deceptively slow in his movements. He smiled when we shook hands, as if he already knew how this was going to end. Spoiler alert. He did. I launched into a hyper-aggressive attack, moving pieces with speed and flair, sacrifices, pins, forks. It was beautiful, until suddenly it wasn't. One subtle, silent move from him neutralized my entire initiative. I was stunned. One more move and I realized I had no real plan, no development, no safety. Within 10 turns, I was crushed. Roger smiled again as he shook my hand. "You've got talent," he said kindly, "but you're playing checkers on a chessboard." That sentence hit me like a blunt rook to the head. Checkers on a chessboard. I laughed it off at the time, but it haunted me afterward, because he was right. I had been chasing tactics like a kid chasing fireflies, random, reactive, without any real structure or purpose. After that tournament, I spiraled. I stopped playing online. I ignored my physical board. I shoved my dog-eared copy of my system into the back of my bookshelf and pretended chess didn't exist. I was humiliated, and worse, I was exhausted. I had spent years on this game. Years I could have used for something else, something easier, something I was actually good at. But chess wouldn't let me go. Even when I avoided it, the board haunted me. I'd see patterns in floor tiles. I'd calculate potential forks in supermarket lines. I even dreamed in algebraic notation. Knight 2f3, queen takes d5, check, always check. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I decided to give it one more try. Just one. I pulled up a random YouTube video. How grandmasters actually think. It was 26 minutes long. I figured I'd watch a few seconds, scoff at the advice, and go back to pretending I didn't care. But I watched the entire thing. And then I watched it again. And then a third time. Because it wasn't just a list of flashy tactics or opening traps. It was a window into a different way of thinking. A quiet, methodical, almost meditative approach. The speaker explained how grandmasters don't look for the best move. They look for the best plan. And each move they make is like a brick in a carefully crafted castle. I realized then that I had spent years trying to build skyscrapers out of sand. So I started over. I didn't just change my approach. I burned the old one down. I unlearned everything I thought I knew. I stopped memorizing openings and started studying pawn structures. I stopped obsessing over tactics and started understanding piece activity. I learned to ask why before asking what. Why this move? Why this square? Why this sacrifice? And for the first time, chess began to make sense. Not perfectly, of course, not immediately. But something clicked. It was slow at first, like watching rusted gears finally start to turn after years of neglect. But it was there. An undeniable shift. I started winning more games. Not many, not spectacularly, but the wins were earned, not handed to me by a blunder, but won by understanding. That shift in mindset changed everything. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't exciting, but it was real. And the more I leaned into it, the clearer the patterns became. I learned about imbalances, about weak squares, about prophylactic thinking. I learned that sometimes the best move isn't the most aggressive, but the most patient. Sometimes the strongest players are the ones who wait, who quietly restrict your options until you suffocate. I finally saw the beauty in simplicity, the power in restraint, the genius in calm, steady improvement. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped fearing losses, because now each loss was a lesson, a chance to understand something deeper, a doorway to growth rather than a wall to crash into. One specific game changed it all for me. I was playing online late at night. My opponent was rated slightly higher than me, but not by much. I played calmly, logically, building a quiet space advantage. I didn't go for wild attacks. I just improved my worst piece, then my next worst, then my pawn structure. By move 20, my position was solid. Then he made a small inaccuracy, not a blunder, just a slightly misplaced knight. The old me would have pounced recklessly, tried to punish it immediately with a flashy tactic. But the new me, I waited. I repositioned. I slowly increased the pressure, controlling key squares and patiently maneuvering my pieces. And it worked. 20 moves later, I had a one endgame. Not because I outcalculated him, but because I outthought him, outplanned him, outweighted him. That victory didn't just feel good, it felt earned. I sat back, staring at the board on my screen, and for the first time in years, I wasn't confused. I wasn't angry or frustrated. I was clear-headed, content, and oddly grateful. Because all those years of losing, all those humiliating defeats, they weren't wasted. They were part of the process. Painful, yes. Embarrassing, definitely. But necessary. Every bad move, every crushed ego, every "you're playing checkers" moment, it all led me here, to understanding, to progress, to a deeper love of the game. And here's the real twist. I still lose, all the time. But now, I lose differently. Now, I lose better. After that game, the one where I won through quiet pressure, instead of desperate flailing, I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and just breathed. Slowly, deeply. I wasn't just relieved. I was transformed. It felt like I'd walked through a door into another dimension, one where strategy whispered louder than showmanship, and patience screamed more clearly than panic. And that change, it didn't just stay on the chessboard. Almost accidentally, it began to seep into the rest of my life. I noticed it first at work, where I once scrambled to finish tasks, jumping from one half-done project to the next, like a confused rook stuck behind pawns. I started approaching things differently. I slowed down. I looked at the whole picture. I asked questions before acting. What's the goal here? What's the threat? What's the opportunity? Those were chess questions. But now, they were life questions. Even in my relationships, I was different. I used to interrupt. I used to defend my point without listening. But now, almost instinctively, I paused. I waited. I gave the other person space, let them finish their move. And then I responded. Not reacted, but responded, with calm consideration. It's strange, isn't it? How a board with 64 squares can teach you how to be a better human. But chess did that for me. It taught me the quiet power of control, the value of waiting for the right moment instead of lunging at the first opening, the beauty of seeing 10 moves ahead, not just on the board, but in life. It was subtle, but it was real. And yet, I'll be honest, it wasn't always easy. Because when you start playing properly, when you stop chasing traps and start studying structure, it gets harder before it gets easier. You're fighting your own old habits. You're reprogramming years of impulsive play. And sometimes the results don't come fast enough. Sometimes you lose even worse than before. But you keep going. Because now you know that every loss is sharpening you. Every mistake is a message. Every defeat is a lesson if you're brave enough to listen. I remember one particularly rough night. I'd played 5 rapid games in a row, lost 4, blundered in the 5th. I was ready to rage quit. Old me would have slammed the laptop shut, cursed the game, and swore off chess for another 3 months. But instead, I opened my notebook. Yes, I started keeping a chess notebook. Not some fancy digital spreadsheet, just a ragged lined journal, filled with scribbles, diagrams, and emotional notes. Like, don't push c5 too early, overextended again, or this knight was doing nothing on a6 for 10 moves, think before you develop. It sounds silly, but writing it down changed everything. Because suddenly my mistakes weren't just losses, they were experiments. I wasn't failing, I was learning. And strangely, that shift gave me confidence. Not the cocky, surface-level kind I had when I was throwing pieces across the board with reckless joy. No, this was quiet confidence, the kind that grows slowly but sticks. And slowly my rating crept up. Not explosively, not dramatically, but steadily, piece by piece, game by game. The really surprising part came when I started teaching. No, not professionally, not formally, but casually, just helping out a coworker's son who was getting into chess. He was 11, enthusiastic and addicted to puzzles. Reminded me of myself, actually. He asked me, "What's the best opening?" I smiled because I knew that question. I had asked it 1,000 times, and I told him the truth. There's no best, just understand why you're making each move. He frowned at first, but that's harder. Exactly, I said, and that's what makes it worth it. Teaching him forced me to clarify things I barely realized I understood. Concepts I had struggled with became clearer when I had to explain them. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was an interpreter of the game. And that's when it truly hit me. I hadn't just learned chess. Chess had taught me. It taught me to respect process over results. It taught me to anticipate rather than react. It taught me that a mistake isn't failure, it's feedback. It taught me that growth, real growth, is uncomfortable, slow, and messy, but it's also incredibly powerful. And perhaps most importantly, it taught me to love losing. That's right, love it. Because once I understood that every loss was a puzzle waiting to be solved, a weakness waiting to be fixed, I no longer feared it. I embraced it. And that simple mindset shift changed everything. Now, when I sit down at the board, whether it's digital or wood, whether it's against a stranger or a friend, I'm not there to win. Not at first. I'm there to understand, to learn, to grow, to see the game and myself more clearly. And funny enough, that's when the wins started coming more often. Not because I chased them, but because I stopped chasing them. Because I focused on the why instead of the what, on the structure instead of the sparkle, on the long game instead of the short-term thrill. And if you're someone like I was, frustrated, stuck, spinning your wheels, I want you to hear this. You are not bad at chess. You are just playing the wrong game. Stop playing moves. Start playing ideas. Stop copying others. Start understanding yourself. And when you lose, and you will, don't walk away angry. Walk away curious. What went wrong? What could have gone differently? What did that position teach you? Because that's the secret I learned after wasting years. You don't lose at chess because you're dumb. You lose because you're not thinking right. But once you start thinking right, once you embrace the slow, steady, strategic nature of the game, everything changes. The part where I finally stop rambling about mindset and tell you exactly what changed. The real techniques. The hard, practical shifts I made after years of losing to finally start playing smarter, sharper, and yes, winning. Because strategy without execution, it's a motivational poster, but strategy plus action, that's transformation. So let's begin, step by step. 1. I stopped memorizing and started visualizing. Early on, I wasted so much time memorizing openings. King's Indian Defense, Queen's Gambit, Sicilian, Ruy Lopez, you name it. I tried to stuff it into my brain like a frantic student before a final exam, but I never understood why those moves worked. I couldn't explain them, let alone improvise when my opponent deviated. So I did something radical. I dropped theory. Instead of grinding opening lines, I practiced visualizing. I'd look at a blank board and imagine pawn structures. I'd close my eyes and picture a knight on c3, a bishop on g5, a queen on d2. I played slow games and forced myself to think 3 moves ahead, mentally, not on the board. That alone, game-changing. Because once you can see the board in your head, even imperfectly, you stop reacting and start predicting. You feel the position. 2. I treated every move like a question. This is probably the most powerful habit I formed. Before every single move I asked, what is my opponent threatening? What am I threatening? What changed with their last move? What squares are weak? What's the long-term plan here? Yes, it slowed me down, but slowness is not weakness. It's depth. Soon, I stopped making blunders, not because I became a genius overnight, but because I was actually thinking. 3. I mastered one structure at a time. Instead of dabbling in dozens of systems, I picked one opening for white and one for black. That was it. For white, I played the London system, not because it was trendy, but because it gave me a solid structure I could understand. For black, I used the Caro-Kann, solid, flexible, and hard to break down. By sticking with just those 2, I saw the same pawn structures, same middle games, and same patterns again and again. And that repetition, it built confidence. You don't need 100 openings. You need one opening. You understand? 4. I studied endgames, and it actually mattered. I used to skip endgames entirely. Like, who wants to memorize king and pawn versus king when you can study flashy tactics? Big mistake. Because most beginner and intermediate games are won or lost in the final 10 moves. I started learning the basics. Opposition. Square of the pawn, Lucina, and Philidor positions. Rook activity. And once I understood them, I stopped panicking in the endgame. I started turning drawn positions into wins. I even saw endgames coming earlier and started planning for them in the middle game. It was like discovering the final level of the game. 5. I played longer time controls and analyzed every game. This one's not sexy, but it's essential. I stopped playing 1-minute and 3-minute blitz games. I switched to 10-minute rapid, then 15 plus under 10, It was painful at first, but it forced me to think, and most importantly, I analyzed every single game afterward, not with an engine, at least not at first, but with my own brain. I asked, where did I go wrong? What was the turning point? Did I have a better move here? Only after that did I check with the stockfish. And when stockfish disagreed with me, I listened, because it was showing me things I couldn't see yet. And eventually I could see them. That's when I knew I was improving. 6. I stopped caring about my rating, and ironically, it skyrocketed. You know the feeling. You're one game away from hitting a milestone. 1,300, 1,400, 1,500, whatever your number is. And you choke. Why? Because you're playing to protect the number, not to understand the game. So I changed that. I stopped checking my rating before or after games. I muted it. I focused on performance, on progress, on patterns. And without that pressure, I played with clarity. My rating went up faster in 3 months than it had in the previous 3 years. 7. I accepted that chess is war and peace. Here's the final paradoxical lesson. Chess is a battle, but it's also meditation. You must fight, calculate, push, and probe, but also pause, observe, and breathe. It's not about dominance. It's about balance. It's not about crushing your enemy. It's about understanding them so deeply that the right move becomes inevitable. When you play like that, mindfully, boldly, purposefully, you don't just become a better chess player. You become a better thinker, a better listener, a better learner, maybe even a better person. So, if you're still losing, good. It means you're still learning. And if you're willing to lose the right way, not recklessly, but curiously, you're already halfway to winning. You don't need to memorize 20 openings. You don't need to blitz your way to 2,000. You need to slow down, think clearly, study positions, not just results, and trust that every painful, humbling game is building something inside you. Because if I could waste years losing and still turn it around, so can you. Just start today and never stop asking, what's the idea behind this move? That's the question that finally set me free.